Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm talking with Geoff Wylde, VP and General Manager, Health and Human Performance at Oura. Geoff, thanks for chatting today.
No, thanks so much. Happy to be here, David.
So Oura, most people are familiar, super cool, tracks, biometrics from us as humans. A lot of times people are looking at for sleep, but you guys have figured out there's a way to make this intelligence very useful for lots of other sectors, to include, I'll say, defense. So give me a little background on really how you found yourself in this role. A little personal background I think is always interesting to start off with.
Yeah, brilliant. Maybe even before I get to my personal background, I'll say how Aura got into defense because it's an interesting story. Aura's always been focused on the idea of readiness. How does sleep or activity levels or stress or illness, how's it impacting your readiness to take on a task today? And we had a number of customers, particularly in like the research labs, Air Force research labs, Naval Health Research Center, who are identifying that they needed to understand the ground truth that drives warfighter readiness. And they were looking at medical grade devices. They were looking at kind of a mil spec. Does the military build their own hardware? And what they realized is that consumer off the shelf devices were going to be the ones that could function the best ecologically, like out in the wild. And so we were approached by a number of those research labs initially just to do these small research studies. But what that started, discovering is that measuring readiness of these soldiers allowed you to not only just accurately measure the components of readiness, but then take interventions that can improve readiness. Readiness being the sort of physical and mental state of an individual. So that's how Aura got pulled into this. It was sort of we were approached by all these research centers and had this very science-led entry.
Awesome. And then personally, tell me about how you got into this.
Man, so my professional background, I worked in strategy consulting at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I worked at a large international organization after that, where I was leading IoT and robotics initiatives, kind of public-private collaboration. And the through line of that was always how is connected technology, like internet connected technology, changing the way that industry works or systems work or humans work. And in 2019, I was working on this kind of side project. It was like December 2019 side project of how wearable devices could monitor illness. And well, 3 months later, like March 2020, that went from being, a little side project to being my full-time job at this international organization. And so I started getting to know all these wearable companies and researchers in this space. And Aura was the first wearable company to sponsor its own study of how you could detect COVID-19 with a wearable device. And so I got to know the CEO and the company through that. I got recruited in, and that's sort of how I landed at Aura. And the first, after we got out of that research phase with AFRL and NHRC, the first big scaled program we had with the military was a program called RATE, Rapid Assessment of Threat Exposure. It was a COVID-19 detection project, tens of thousands of airmen getting rings on them to provide early detection of illness and and constrain that or quarantine them to constrain the spread and maintain unit readiness. So that's how I personally got pulled then into this world of human performance and wearable based sort of interventions in the defense space.
That's awesome. And I love the fact that, you know, you guys are taking everyone, we got a cool technology, go use it, but yours is readiness focused, which is so critical to have that mission alignment of why is this existing. And so applaud you for that. That's awesome. And so most defense tech, a lot of the DIB innovator podcast guests are focused on, let's say external threats. What's this weapon widget technology for an external threat? But you're focused inwards on kind of, the physiology of the warfighter itself. You know, what have we seen out of that, I'd say, trends, and why is this a priority for DoD or DOW nowadays?
Simply put, the most advanced platform that we have is the human being. Even with AI, even with all sorts of advances in hardware, The human is still the most complex and the most advanced decision-making tool that we have, and we have to invest in that platform and augment that platform. And there's been a culture shift, maybe even a fundamental rethinking of the value of that human platform. And unfortunately, often that is sparked by tragic events, naval accidents leading to the loss of life, or vehicle rollovers at National Training Center that are fatigue related, obviously, pandemics, like we talked about earlier. And that has led to an awareness that wearable biometric technology can allow us to have the same level of real-time insight on the human platform that we currently have on the technology platforms. I can tell you the vibration, readiness, fuel levels, status of an unmanned aerial vehicle very hard in real time telemetry, very hard, if not, you know, currently we don't do that for the human platform. And that's what wearables provide. And that allows this to go from being a mere wellness or fitness tracker to a mission critical defense tool.
Yeah, it's interesting you say, humans are the most important platform, yet I would contend maybe the most misunderstood. We don't know everything, and so that's awesome to start peeling back that onion. What are you seeing? Like, what are some of the biggest as you've done your initial deployments into, whether it's soldiers, sailors on aircraft, astronauts, Air Force pilots, like where are you seeing like the most critical, measurements or, data that is starting to really inform how we maintain and how we maximize, the human platform, if you will.
I think historically the most underappreciated is sleep. And recently at the Holistic Health and Fitness Fireside Chat AUSA hosted, Lieutenant General Francis was talking about the return on investment of the H2F program in the Army. And he highlighted that sleep drives the most compelling return on investment. I'll tell you what a well-known human performance coach in the Army told me recently. He was like, the Army knows how to run. We don't know how to sleep. And there's so many metrics, so many ways to answer that question, David. But the top one I would say is maximizing sleep when you can, because that is going to drive the fastest recovery. It is going to mitigate the risk of injury. Your natural defenses are stronger if you sleep. Your immune system is stronger if you're sleeping well. You're less likely to get ill. You're going to be more mentally fit. I mean, everyone listening to this podcast knows the difference between a good night's sleep and a bad night's sleep. Your emotional resilience is impacted. So, how are you going to handle that stressful situation? That isn't to say that you're always going to be able to sleep. Like, we understand the constraints of defense. It is not conducive always to great night's sleeps. So how do you maximize the time and opportunities that you have? And how do you ensure that you're as recovered as possible so that when you have to go and that fatigue curve is going to start decaying, that you're starting from the best possible place.
Yeah, so I mean, there's data out there, right? And what to do with the data. Obviously, there's AI and things to help process that better. But just because we have data, we haven't, in many respects, figured out how to operationalize it. How are you seeing the customer, defense try to operationalize? Just because I've got my Oura ring and it says I slept a 52 last night and my readiness is a 48, out of 100. That's a personal information. And this is more just conversation. That's personal information. How does the command or operationalize that data when it is personal information, but also to make their warfighters better? What have you seen trends in how to operationalize that information?
First up, you're looking pretty good for a 48 sleep score today. So,
Today I was more like an 84, so that's
there we
not
go.
bad.
All right. That's what I like to hear. There's three levels of decision making and impact that we have. The first, and maybe the most important, is the individual warfighter. They have the ring on, they have the Aura app. They are getting that AI driven insights into actions they can take to improve their health and performance. They will get tailored insights in the app of what behaviors are driving the best recovery, what they can do to manage that themselves, days where they might need to, take rest where they can, or days where they can really go out and push it and achieve, new and impossible things. The second layer is what we often call the provider layer. So that might be in the SOCOM community, that might be your, strength and conditioning coach, or your, mental resilience coach, or, even often like your chaplain. In those providers, there's often more willingness for the individual warfighter to share their individual data to that provider to get tailored coaching, tailored insights. And then the third level is at, command level. And there, what we do is we provide aggregate, de-identified unit level metrics. How ready is this? Usually we start at sort of like in the army, at least at the company level. Sometimes we'll go down to like a platoon level, depends on the use case. But we provide that level of kind of aggregate insight that command can then see how is our training schedule impacting the readiness and recovery of our people? How do we manage that training schedule to optimize the readiness and recovery? And that doesn't always mean like take it easy. In fact, most of the time it's the opposite. Usually what we're saying is here's how you can push them harder. Because if you push harder and then you recover appropriately, you become stronger, you become more resilient. And so we provide that at a de-identified aggregate level at the command level.
Have you seen adoption? Let's just at the coaching level, you know, they are, and maybe they don't have a choice. Do like, your users have a choice to share this information, or because of the way the acquisition process works, they've given that up?
Great question. Really glad you asked that. Everybody who gets an Oura ring, whether you are in the Department of Defense or not, you have to consent before Oura will share your data with any third party. Always. Full stop. So even if that's a doctor, even if that's your strength and conditioning coach, you still need to agree to share that data. Otherwise, it just stays with you and it doesn't go anywhere, including at that aggregate level to your command.
Well, that's good to know. So are you seeing then adoption of users' willingness to share A with the coaches and B at the aggregate, unidentified layer at the command?
This was a fear I had initially, was that people wouldn't opt to share. It is overwhelming that they opt to share their data. And the key there is education. What benefit do you get from doing that? Why would you do that? And then providing the guarantees that it won't be used against them. So often that means going through human subject review boards so that there's a level of protection for that data sharing, or demonstrating that all of the data that's being shared at a command level is de-identified in aggregate. We also often, for our military customers, we've developed an entirely novel tech stack that includes de-identified accounts. So not only, and that's for privacy and security reasons, there is literally no data in the Aura system in those examples where we do use de-identified accounts. There's nothing in the Aura data that could even identify that individual. So we offer these multiple layers of privacy and security control.
Yeah, it's great to hear because I think that is a fear, right? Of especially with this AI boom coming, and your data is no longer your data. How to segregate that, and so sharing that educational side of here's how we're making this important and useful. You can use it, but it's not going out to the world to be used against you.
And we've found that particularly engaging with enlisted leadership and COs, that's that's key to building that credibility and with the community. So obviously we have champions often from the officer side, and then we build deep relationships on the enlisted and NCO world, and that's where we find that's the real place that you build trust. And if you can convince, Sergeant Major so and so, then that will filter through to the rest of the unit.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's just good BD. Boots on the ground matters. How
100%.
how do you relate to your customer?
And, and all transparently, I never served. And so, as the leader of this team, my number one priority is recruiting people who have lived experience of this. And so we've got the human performance team at Aura, small but mighty full stack team. We've got the PhD in athletic training who trains the naval special warfare. We've got two retired command sergeant majors on staff. Lots of athletic and medical experience in the military space on our team, as well as a full stack engineering team of people who have been working in security and data analytics for DoD or DOW for decades.
That's awesome. Yeah, relatability. Knowing what those folks are going through. Can you share you had any deployment of Aura technology, rings, and data to any do you have any like cool use case that would kind of wrap up, here's what you deployed, here was the purpose behind it, and then, what were the outcomes from, that test, if you will, or that deployment?
Yeah, tons of examples.
I mean, the coolest.
I'll pick on one that I'm really excited about. I don't know if I can name the exact unit, so I'll speak a little more generally, but it was a armored army unit. They were going through a gunnery event to qualify soldiers on their weapon system. And before, during, and after this field exercise, they had Oura rings. So it's sort of a time constrained experiment. And what we were able to show is that biometrics, particularly heart rate variability, sleep, and activity levels, were predictive of how you were going to perform at the gunnery event. And if we can start to predict what makes someone more likely to be a top tier qualifier on that weapons platform, we can now take tailored interventions to improve the likelihood and effectiveness of that entire unit. And I think that was a major aha moment for our team and for our customers in the Army to have that ground truth data. This isn't just improving wellness and holistic fitness. This drives an ROI in terms of the effectiveness and readiness of those troops.
That's awesome. So you were able to see like, okay, they're ready going into it, then stress goes up, sleep changes, and then those that were, because each person is different, right? I may react to stress differently than you, but as that change, you could track and go, okay, this is, when they hit a certain milestone or their HRV changes this much, there's a significant decrease in performance. Like you could measure it like that.
Correct. Exactly. And like there was a statistical significant predictive element of particularly HRV and being a top quartile performer. And you would see during this event, we have, let's call it, you're sort of in the field for 2 weeks. We had a baseline for a month beforehand, and then we tracked them for 2 weeks afterwards as well. And you can see that immediate stress and decay curve of when they go in the field. And as they're going into increasingly difficult tables, gunnery, through the gunnery event, you can see stress levels change. You can see, sleep impacted from being in the field. You even see body temperature changes, in part because they're in the field in Colorado in February, one of the interesting kind of things that we were investigating that was a little counterintuitive, we were like, why is a low body temperature predictive of poor performance? And when we thought about the context, the situation, if they're colder at night, chances are essentially they've got a bad sleeping bag or something like that, and they're not getting as good a night's sleep. And so that was an interesting counterintuitive indicator that we found.
Yeah. And your body's spending time trying to heat itself up. So it's not recovering. Yeah. I can only imagine. Did you find any other, and I'm just curious, were you able to track to the individual level, like, hey, this person, for whatever reason, didn't get stressed, a certain, and were you able to make any correlations across maybe a type of person or just notice that some people don't get stressed in these environments? So was there a change, was that very noticeable?
It's highly like it's, as you said, highly personalized. So it's hard to make blanket statements. The higher the HRV baseline going in, the more likely they were to be resilient to stress. So so what does that tell us? Like, if you are more hard, it's not easy to change your HRV baseline, but it's very doable. And the way to do it is, you know, eat better and get like a healthy amount of cardiovascular exercise and recover well from that exercise. And if you can do those things, that changes your HRV baseline, which we found to mean that this person is less likely to have, a dip in their HRV or other reported metrics and stress during the event.
Wow, a statistical significant item of get your HRV, measure everyone's HRV, get that as high as you can, and rest and training, and
Yeah,
that's
and the
pretty cool.
metric, like, what do you do to like, here's the thing. It's like, what do you do to improve your HRV or improve your performance? It's not like the actual things aren't always rocket science. Once you get to like really optimizing that last 1%, okay, now you get into some really interesting kind of science. But the basics: sleep well, eat well, exercise, take care of your mind, take care of your soul. And that's easy for Jeff and David to say on a podcast. Very hard for individuals to put that into practice. And one of the superpowers of Aura is it incentivizes people to take those behavior changes and make them sticky. That improves their baseline. And I've got tons of data on this. The simplest way to think about this is you have that extra glass of wine or, couple beers or can of Red Bull before going to bed. You're going to see that in your scores the next morning, and you're going to get that you get that message 2 or 3 times, and you just start to say, do I really need that? Am I really going to play that video game for an extra 30 minutes? Do I really need that extra drink? Do I really need to, you know, crush that last episode of whatever you're binge watching at the moment? You're just going to start thinking about the impact it has on your body, and more likely to take the individual steps that lead to short-term readiness improvements and long-term health outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's funny, because you're a commercial product, obviously. We'll get a little bit more to that, but you know, certain sectors or certain personas have higher personal discipline, right? With so many of us, I'd put mine to this is like, yeah, I had a couple extra beers. I see it the next day, and I'm just an observer. Like, ooh, I'm gonna feel like shit today. Yes, but when you're working with special operators and folks that are trying to optimize, care about how they feel, that's a very different game. And so that is super important that they can actually apply discipline into their habits using that as a driver to help shift their behavior. I think that's awesome.
And to make that really tangible, you know, even in the special operations community, people often use alcohol as a coping
Absolutely.
mechanism. And we have one customer in that community that reported that their operators reported that 80% of operators reported reducing alcohol consumption based off of feedback from the Aura ring. And that has a huge impact on their health, on their performance, on their long-term health. And so that was a data point that's always really stuck with me as something that I'm quite proud of helping with. But it isn't just the special operations community that benefits from that. It goes down to, you know, everyone across the services. We see similar benefits.
Yeah, it's just anyone that cares about, I mean, executive leadership teams, they need to be performing. Otherwise, they show up at work as a jackass, and that's not good.
Are
So,
you speaking from experience here? Well, you can tell your boss to just go get some sleep, and
yeah. Well, too bad we can't read each other's, but it is funny. It becomes like a game. Like, I'll show up and, my good buddy and co-founder, I'm like, how'd you sleep last night? He's like, 65. I'm like, I'm a 68 too. But it does bring awareness of, hey, I may not be as resilient in stressful situations, or he may not be, and we can point that out. So it's actually kind of fun to share. We don't share, across the platform, but it's very open and that dialogue. So I think it does apply outside of just being aware of how you're showing up.
We have anecdotal evidence of of that both in our defense customers as well as our commercial customers. One that always stuck with me is NASCAR. So we've worked with NASCAR a couple of years ago, and they outfitted their executive team. And you might imagine that the NASCAR executive team aren't exactly like the touchy feely type.
Yes.
And what they found, similar to what you just said, is that the Aura data gave them an objective way to talk about how they are feeling, and it opened up the door, it opened up the doors for them to now talk about things that otherwise they may not have. And as a result, the way that they've reported it back to us is it's changed the leadership culture where it feels much more collaborative, much safer for people to share things that they wouldn't have before, whether that's personal, but more importantly, about the operations of NASCAR. And it's changed the culture of that leadership team. And it all started with exactly what you said. It's like showing up in the elevator in the morning and being like, "Oh man, I'm at a 52 today," and the other person in the elevator being like, "Oh, I know what a 52 feels like," in a little bit of sympathy. Whereas before, that conversation never would have happened.
Yeah, I think that's get high performance team, that transparency and touchy feely, if you will. Things that will not normally come out in a conversation is pretty special. That you can get that culture set up that way.
Yeah, yeah, and what it breeds is performance,
Right.
right? It breeds trust, and trust breeds the ability to communicate more effectively. Being able to communicate more effectively leads to improved performance of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were a commercial customer to pivot a little bit. I mean, commercial supplier, if you will. Then you pivoted defense, or well, we'll just say defense. How was that transition that you witnessed of trying to get into defense? Because there's lots of challenges with that and adapting a consumer product to that sphere.
I think that there were three main things that come to mind for me. One, it is a different go-to-market motion than consumer. Two, it does require specific technology investments to be fit for purpose. And three, it requires relationship development with the defense community. And so we've had to invest in that. And to the credit of Aura's leadership, our CEO, our chief commercial officer, our chief operations officer, and our board, they recognize the importance of working in the military space, both because of the business opportunity, but also because of the strategic value and the mission importance. And so they gave me and the team the air cover we needed internally to do something, this go to market motion that looks very different than selling into Best Buy or on auraring.com. And it's taken time. It takes time to build that. And we need to show momentum and wins along the way, which we have. We're developing some great traction, and we've got the revenue to back this up, and the impact and ROI stories like we talked about before. But it does require that organizational buy-in.
Your standard GTM metrics that you run at your board meetings or at your executive don't match. It's a different, you can't apply the same metrics in the same way that you did previously. Yeah.
100%. And it is a very different sales cycle as well. So in addition to those short-term metrics, it's like you can work on a deal for 18 months and people are like, "Why are you investing so much in this? It's not leading to anything." And then the deal hits, and all of a sudden it became like, everyone's celebrating and saying, "Oh yeah, this was a great idea. I knew it all along." But to be fair, what I'm giving credit to our leadership for understanding that, so that time, and giving us the ear cover and time to invest in this. And then part of that then is understanding also that the technology stack needs to be different. You can't host everything on your commercial cloud for defense. And we've had to develop, alternative technology stacks to serve this space. One, to, obviously secure the data, but also to meet the mission requirements There's instances where people can't have a personal phone, aren't going to have access to the internet. Maybe they're in the space station, like the literally use case we've solved. How do you collect, process, and provide insight on that data in those operational environments? And so we've built this flexible technology stack where you have obviously we have the ring and the app still available, but in those forward deployed or denied environments or austere environments like space, we've built a separate data collection and processing solution that can operate on an aircraft carrier or can operate, on the space station.
Yeah. That you go into like, I remember back in the day, going into secure facilities, you can't take a phone. You can't take anything that can receive or transmit, and then you run into this, well, how do I wear this ring into those facilities? I'm sure you had to do technology shifts so that you block certain things out. And
So we are on the NSA approved list to be taken into a SCIF. Mainly, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no microphone, there's no camera. The only antenna on it is a Bluetooth low energy antenna that can be put into airplane mode on the charger. So it can passively record without any kind of transmitting. And so that's how we've received that approval. And that allows us to be taken into all of these operating environments. And when people come back out, and either they connect to their phone or they connect to our what we call our Edge app that other tech I was talking about, then they take the ring out of airplane mode, and then all of that data kind of repopulates. The ring has 8 days of battery life. It's got, it can store over a week's worth of data. So we can sort of have those intermittent syncs.
yeah. So you mentioned, to piggyback a little bit on your go to market relationship, when you're working with defense, obviously a very different acquisition process. When you're looking at, I'd say, defense enterprise acquisition vice Best Buy. Talk to me a little bit about how just that acquisition went and how you're making investments in future where there wasn't a requirement. There's a lot of different churns where a lot of time governmental, here's the requirement we want, and then you go run and make this widget vice. We're seeing more in defense tech, but I imagine it applies to you as seeing, skating to where the puck's going to be, not where it is right now kind of mentality. How have you seen that in acquisition on the Oura side?
Great question. There's a few ways to answer that. The first one is like the shape of our sales pipeline. I got this advice from the chief business officer at a very large AI and drone company. I'll leave it at that. And he said, 90% of your revenue is going to come from the top 10 deals you do any year in defense. Maybe even less. Could be top one deal you do that year. And you're going to have this long tail, hundreds of small deals that you're doing, but you got to keep doing those because you never know when that small deal that someone swiped a government P card to purchase or, was under, they went on our GSA schedule and was able to get it in under that amount. You never know when that customer and that pilot is going to be the proof point for the large acquisition motion that's going to make your year next year. And so you have to strike that balance. And we obviously invest a lot of our execution and engineering resources on those top deals. We have to find ways to service that long tail without drowning in it. But our BD and sales team need to be really covering all of that. And then building a technology platform that can service that long tail of deals without a large amount of field engineering support. And so that's having your sort of product market fit. So that's point one. Point two is then having as many different contracting vehicles available as possible. So that could be going through the tailored logistics service contract. It could be going through GSA. It could be, we used to have, when we were smaller, we had SIBRs that we were working on. Relationships with prime contractors, and it's having as many arrows in the quiver there as possible so that your customer has different acquisition pathways to get to you, in really investing in that and having the right expertise on staff. We've got a program manager who's been, she's a veteran herself. She worked in large prime contracting kind of government space her whole life. And she was already an Oura user, really passionate about the technology, but also passionate about the disruption that's happening today in government acquisitions. So she's helping kind of lead our strategy around that. And then the last point I'd make is that we are investing ahead of the curve. So we are moving at the speed of industry, not the speed of bureaucracy. We are shovel ready to go on enterprise size deals. And we're trying to be a core part of the conversation of acquisitions reform so that you can take advantage of consumer off the shelf devices for our customers.
Are most of your contracts done through programmatic dollars, like you're trying to get line items in the budget, or are you more, or can you purchase these through O&M? Like, how are you, or all?
Yeah. All of the above and R&D. It's actually historically the largest amount of money coming to human performance was R&D. And then you'll get a lot of discretionary funds, O&M dollars. And what we're seeing now is this transition to program money. And that's as the R&D programs mature and go through that sort of, palm cycle and whatnot. But we're seeing that disrupted a little bit today where it's that timeline and process is being collapsed. And so we're now responding to OTAs of all sorts. And so we're seeing that sort of historical and long process of R&D to program money. That timeline is collapsing and we're here for it. So the 60-second airlift wing from Air Mobility Command at a Joint Base Lewis McChord, they essentially spent their gas money to go buy Oura rings. So they were awarded what's called a MEEP award. It's a pot of discretionary funds, O&M funds that they were awarded a year and a half ago for being fuel efficient in delivery of their missions. They decided to take all of that and invest in human performance technology for exactly what you're just describing, David, around like monitoring the readiness of maintainers, of pilots, and on the one hand, it's brilliant that they're investing in this and recognizing the return on investment. On the other hand, it's a little bit sad that they have to dip into their gas money to go buy this technology. But hopefully, coming out of that will be a case study, a proof point that they can then take, up the chain of command across Air Mobility Command, or even all the way up to the top of the Air Force, and show how investment in human performance technology improves mission readiness and mission outcomes.
Yeah. Well, the great thing for those units, they don't always, they budget for a certain amount of gas, and depending on what happened, they may have extra. They're not going to spend it all, so there might be ability to spend that in that case. So, yeah, it's a great point. Well, first we're gonna have to start wrapping this up. But if you give one piece of advice to defense leaders who are on the fence about human performance technology, what would you tell them about why they need to invest in this?
I would tell them that the cost of not knowing is measured in lost lives, lost missions, and lost dollars due to preventable injuries, fatigue related errors, unnecessary turnover. And when you invest in understanding the human platform, you're investing in a proven force multiplier, and you can't manage what you don't measure.
That's great advice. Well, thanks, Geoff. If folks are interested in following up, following what you guys are doing, getting in touch with you, how best would they do that to engage, whether it's a defense leader or just Joe Schmo like me sitting on the sideline?
You can just go to auraring.com/defense and, you can reach us there for sure. That's probably the best way to get in touch with the team.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, this has been enlightening. I love what you guys are doing, and I think taking care of the human body has long been overlooked, and it's great we have that capability to begin to close that loop so we can be super effective. Thanks so much for your time, and really enjoy it. Look forward to meeting you in person sometime.
Yeah, likewise, David. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.